It's been 2 decades from the time when the South Canyon Fire killed 14 firefighters on the slopes of Storm King Mountain in Colorado. Each spring, the Redding Hotshots wrap up their fire refresher training by leading a staff ride to the site. They come prepared, having read John McClain's book and the 1998 follow-up to the original investigation report. Some students test their fitness using the same fire line escape route that was used in 1994. They face the reality of hiking in steep, uneven terrain and the additional challenges that being part of a large group can bring. Over the years, the fire community has come to recognize that human factors are just as important as keeping track of the fire itself. The fire is just going where the fuel, wind, and topography allow it. We are the ones that put ourselves in harm's way. It's often a sobering moment for many students when they hear the story straight from the survivors and relate to the circumstances, realizing they might have done the same thing. 20 years ago, I was one of the 49 firefighters on Storm King Mountain. Over the last year, I've interviewed 11 of us that were there. Now, we will take you through the fire as we experienced it so that you can learn from our mistakes. Colorado is in a severe drought after a low snowfall winter and a hot, dry spring. An evening lightning storm starts many new fires on the Grand Junction district. One bolt strikes a ridge coming off Storm King Mountain near the town of Glenwood Springs. The small fire smoldered and occasionally torched pinyon and juniper trees. That smoke is noticed by many in the area and reported to authorities. One man calls directly to the BLM Grand Junction office. He's located in South Canyon, across the river from the smoke, and dispatch, needing a fire name, records it as a South Canyon Fire, and that becomes its official name from then on. At 1414, with a thundercell dumping rain in the area, a BLM engine foreman reports to dispatch that the fire is in rugged terrain and is inaccessible with the current weather. He recommends smoke jumpers and also a helicopter for water drops when conditions improve. At 1438, a plane load of smoke jumpers, a lead plane, and an air tanker are rolling out of Grand Junction Air Center towards the fire 70 air miles away. At this point, it would have been a classic initial attack use of smoke jumpers. But instead, 5 miles out, dispatch calls and diverts them to a new fire 55 miles away, a wind-driven Sage Flats fire that went to 160 acres that night with engines and crews on it. With local crews committed to other fires on the district, no other action is taken this day on the small, low-priority South Canyon Fire.
It's a fire. Today is July 4th. It's probably started by lightning a day or two ago. That's less than a half mile from the house.
Late that afternoon, during a lull in the fire's activity, Butch Blanco's BLM engine, a Forest Service engine, and Michelle Ryerson's small hand crew arrive at the freeway. Blanco has been assigned as the incident commander, and Ryerson is squad boss.
Saw it, on the hillside, inconspicuous, just kind of backing itself down the hill and not a lot of fire activity. And at that point in time, we knew it was going to be too late to try to get up there. The spring was very busy. I initial attacked my first fire. We went out in March, and it was pretty consistent initial attack from then on.
They drive to the BLM office in West Glenwood Springs to prepare for the next day and to try and get some needed sleep. Blanco calls dispatch requesting more firefighters, an air tanker, and helicopters for crew haul and bucket work, but resources are stretched thin. That evening, the fire grows to 11 acres and is estimated to be 29 acres by the morning. With no helicopter support coming, Blanco plus 6 start the long hike up what's become known as the East Drainage. It took 3 hours to reach the fire.
As you got, towards the top of that, you're just on your hands and knees, working your way to the ridge top. We get to the fire and it's just kind of skunking around and PJ grasses and that. It's just really steep, rocky terrain on the interstate side, and there wasn't a whole lot we could do with that. It just wasn't worth trying to get anybody down on that side. So we pretty much concentrated on, the top knob, getting a heli spot because we knew that we were going to need supplies, and then try to start getting a line around it. It was pretty obvious that, we were going to need some more help.
An air tanker arrives, but because of downdrafts and terrain, can only make drops on the interstate side of the fire. The pilot radios Blanco that this would be a better job for a helicopter. Blanco replies, "I'd love to have one."
Put in a little bit of line, and then our saws broke. So that pretty much, ended what we could really effectively get done. And that it was late enough in the day. It was probably, time that we start hiking out anyways. About that time we were hiking out that the first load of smoke jumpers were coming in, and we didn't have a face-to-face with them before we left.
Orbiting the fire are 8 Montana-based smoke jumpers. Don Mackey is jumper in charge. Also on board are Sarah Doring and Kevin Erickson. Their day had started at a spike base in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Loaded up on the plane and we flew to GJ. We landed and they said, "We got a request for you guys, but we were going to brief you up."
I think we talked in generalities about, we've been having red flag warnings every day, and it has to do with low humidity and afternoon winds. We'd been living with red flag warnings for weeks and weeks, and maybe we were maybe I was complacent, and because that didn't mean a heck of a lot to me by then. You knew that it was going to be hot and dry in the afternoon, and you were probably going to have some winds come up.
And we were all pretty happy. It was our my first fire mission of the season, and the first one in pretty much almost 2 years, because 1993 was so quiet.
We were happy to go finally get on a fire, and it looked like a pretty good one.
And we were all pretty stoked because we just see this. At first I couldn't even see the wisp of smoke, and then the plane went around and we circled it, and it was just basically a wisp of smoke coming up. We were pretty happy, high-fiving, going, "All right, this is going to be a piece of cake, We're going to jump this thing, we're going to have it lined by midnight, and it'll be a done deal."
We didn't recognize how steep it really was and how big it really was over the top of that.
So the spotter selected a jump spot, and with Don Mackey first in the door, and picked one out, and Don and I were jump partners. He went out first, and I followed him out. And I was thankful he was first. This was my 4th season of smoke jumping, so pretty young in my career. And I remember opening up and looking around like, where did that jump spot go? But I could see Don, so basically tried to follow him in.
They complete jump operations, gather cargo, and hike the ridge up to the fire. Mackey scouts and calls Blanco, reporting that the fire has crossed Blanco's hand line and is now burning actively. The 8 jumpers start lining the east flank.
It's just scattered grass and PJ type thing and rocks. Digging was pretty easy, but as we started to go down that east side, it was pretty steep.
And as we worked our way around, it got dark, and then a lot of stuff started rolling down on top of us.
I'm trying to recall who it was that almost got taken out. I don't know, I want to say it was Woods, but I'm not sure. And that's why we decided it was kind of a lost cause right now. We just couldn't see the things that were rolling. I remember Don saying, "Well, maybe I'll pull out of here and we'll head up on top, and it's not worth getting killed over here." So we called it a night and hiked back up to the top and made camp up there.
Mackey radios dispatch, estimates the fire at 50 acres, and orders 2 Type 1 crews.
That night was kind of one of those restless type sleeps just because of the wind, and you could hear the cars going by on the interstate, and you could also hear the train. At one point I remember waking up and walking over and looking at the edge going, wow, the fire did grow a little bit, this is a lot bigger than it was yesterday, and it looks like a little bigger than what we can handle right now. But yeah, I woke up the next morning, and Don had already been up scouting and I could hear him talking to dispatch on the radio.
Mackey requests a helicopter for crew haul and bucket work and a plane to be an eye in the sky. He is talked into using one helicopter for everything.
It was still windy that morning, so we kind of went off the edge a little bit into the trees and had some breakfast, and that's when I took that picture. So we just chatted, and Don briefed us on what he had talked to dispatch about, you know, talking about our game plan for that day.
It was pretty well nuked out around H1 where you felt pretty good, but all the way around it was, you know, there was no control line underneath you or anything like that. So that's why we wanted to get something up on top to start off from so we could start digging and try to flank that fire. Basically use that ridge line as a good defensible starting point. Otherwise, we really didn't have a good starting point.
Butch Blanco's crew starts hiking up the east drainage. The mixed BLM Forest Service crew now numbers 11. It had been another sleepless night for those at the BLM office.
And the phones rang constantly the whole entire night. I mean, they rang and rang, so finally I picked them because I couldn't figure out why was the office phone ringing after hours? It was a resident calling in, the fire. Going in to the shift that day, we knew there was a cold front, but the forecast that we had heard before we left the office was that expect moisture. So we made sure that we put our rain gear in our PG bags. That was more on my mind than the winds and how it played out.
Blanco makes it to the saddle area and checks in with dispatch. He learns that a hotshot crew and another load of jumpers are on their way.
When we got up there, I was very surprised how big the fire had grown, and a lot of it I couldn't see. It was down, the west drainage into the Gamble Oak.
Blanco and Mackey meet for the first time and discuss tactics. Since terrain blocks most of the fire from view, they agree that they need to recon the fire from the air before finalizing a plan. Blanco's crew is to brush out the hand line that the jumpers are putting in from H1 and clear another helispot, H2, to fly crews and their gear in and jump gear out. Mackey flags a starting point for the jumpers to line the west flank.
And then we got to where the fire went off the west side, and we were going to dig line down there. And when we got to that point, that's where I was like, well, how do we get so lucky? Because I remember looking over the edge and just seeing that very tall brush.
Helicopter 93 Romeo arrives on the scene and lands at Canyon Creek Estates to set up helibase with their ground crew. A plane load of jumpers arrives over the fire. This load is carrying a mix of McCall, Missoula, and North Cascade smoke jumpers, including myself. Late the night before, we had demobbed off a fire into Grand Junction. After a short night's sleep, another fire was awaiting us. While waiting for the pilots to arrive, we had time to ready our gear and get a briefing.
But I do recall we got a jump weather briefing that morning, and we were notified about the impending weather front coming in the afternoon.
Talking about the IC and he uses jumpers, he's comfortable with jumpers, make sure you do a good job. And
we went and flew the fire, and as we flew the fire, I had visions of another beautiful high mountain fire in the Aspens and the Rockies, and it was in the shale country, and it was Gamble's Oak, and it was a messy, sun-baked piece of crap, really, as far as a firefighter would look at it.
Just looking at this big, ugly, smoldering pig, wondering what are we going to do with this thing. I'm looking out there just going, how would we, what sort of tactics is this? It's just hung up all over the place, kind of fingery.
No real, heel, flanks, top of the fire. It was all on every side of this little mountain top.
I remember getting a good look at the fire, and because I could see where the guys, I could see their yellow shirts from they were kind of strung out along that main ridge, and so I figured that they were working on that side of the fire, and now we just need to concentrate on this west side.
Being a smoke jumper, you always see things from an aerial view. It's like, oh, that doesn't look that steep. Oh, it doesn't look that far. Then you get on the ground and it's like, wow, this is steep. Wow, this is far.
After jump operations are completed, we tie in with the other jumpers who are starting the west flank line. The helicopter takes Blanco and Mackey on a recon, and for the first time they see just how big the fire is. Since all their firefighters are already in place on the main ridge, they go with their plan. Mackey calls the jumpers and tells them to continue lining the west flank.
And so we drug our feet and said, I don't think we want to go down there. Why don't you come and talk to us first? Don hits the ground and comes down and talks to us. And I grabbed Don and just took him off to the side. We walked down the hill a little ways in the brush, and I said, okay, what do you see? What are you seeing when you're up there? He goes, well, you know, it looks pretty sparse down directly below us, and it's not burning, very hot, and I think we can get around it. And I'm like, you sure? You know, is there a safety zone below us? And he goes, yeah, it's pretty open. I go, okay. And about that time, we had a tree up on top of the ridge flare up, and basically you guys and our guys kind of all jumped on it and started digging around it, and he and I walked back up to the top.
As we were pounding out those 2 trees on the top of the ridge, thousands of sparks are blowing off downslope on the back side, the shady side of the ridge, but it was just due to the timing, and it was early morning, and that side of the slope was still in shade and still damp from moisture from the night, was the only reason it didn't take off. I didn't express those concerns to anybody or articulate that. There was more experienced jumpers on the fire, and I just kind of defer to them as far as, you know, making the decisions at that time. I just, you know, plugged along with everybody else.
It didn't seem like that bad of a plan, because obviously the smoldering downhill creeping of the fire hadn't been checked. And so I went, okay, well, let's get this thing corralled.
It was kind of strange. Everybody just kind of fell into place and started down where that flag line was, flanking the fire. There was reasons why we were dragging our feet, and it was because we didn't like it. And we probably should have hung to our guns about that, and didn't. You know, everything just kind of fell into place, and folks went down the hill and went to work.
As we first came off the top, digging the line downhill, it wasn't so bad. The brush was a moderate height, but as we started getting like a couple 100 feet down, it soon became apparent that it was a lot bigger than it looked. It was over our heads, 10, 12 feet tall.
Even the most basic firefighters know, you know, you start getting into some kind of vegetation, it's as high as you are, as tall as you are, and that thick, you're going to be more in tune to what the potential is for things to go wrong.
And the only way out was the way that we were constructing, and to go back up the hill. That was the only way to get to the safety zone up at H1. And the further we went, the further we were getting from our safety zone.
It was just an uneasy feeling. You know, we can do this, you know, let's just hurry up and get it done kind of thing.
Besides a little bit of the more enclosed feeling with the heavy brush, again, there was no sense of alarm because the fire behavior itself was very benign at this time. The fire behavior was 6-inch flame lengths creeping through the dead leaf litter underneath the live Gambel's oak. There was no flame creeping up the bark of the individual tree stems. There was no crinkling of the leaves, the green leaves hanging above in the canopy. There was no crinkling, there was no shrinking. There was no visible indicator that the fuel was being pre-treated at all.
You know, a lot of us are from the Northwest, and certainly for me, brush, you know, I was just used to alder brush, and you know, it burns, the fire burns in the twigs and leaves underneath that, but it never really burns it. It's usually a place you can catch the fire.
You know, we tried to burn it out a couple of times up on top by throwing a fusee into it, and it wouldn't burn. We just couldn't get it to burn, and so we were under the impression that, okay, this stuff's fairly safe now. It didn't burn then, and must have enough moisture in it that it's not going to go now.
But then on the other hand, there was this, like, it just didn't feel right being at stuff. I'd never been in a California fire, but I was starting to wonder, is this that kind of stuff?
To be honest, I mean, I was a little uncomfortable, but I wasn't, you know, so much so that I felt the need to speak up at that time.
So one of the many mistakes we made, especially as workers, is we didn't pass on our concerns to Don Mackey. I think maybe if enough of us had spoken up, he might have been swayed. And we just didn't like being in here. And but yet, that's just the way the culture was then. You just kind of work away, grumble amongst yourselves. Don would walk by and, hey, Don, how you doing? And he'd walk on and, oh man, this is bad. And then what happened along here is the tree flared up. And the tree was actually on the other side of this spur ridge right here. So we couldn't see it, but we could hear it. And it sounded pretty impressive. It sounded like a lot more than a tree. And it's sending up smoke. And that kind of confirmed with us along here. There's like, okay, this is our excuse to get out of here.
When Mackey said, hey, let's pull out, that uneasy feeling that I had definitely subsided as we were starting to walk back up.
Longenecker happened to be out there right by it scouting the line. And he called back and said, no, it's okay, it's just a single tree.
Called the helicopter to drop a bucket on it, and then it calmed down. They said, well, let's go back in and keep at it.
And then after that got cooled down, it's like, oh, now we got to go back down there. And definitely more uneasy feeling.
More grumbling. We're going back down. We're going even further into it. As the line construction continues, the flare-up tree becomes the stump. And 9 Prineville hotshots joined the West Flank Fire Line crew.
We'd already put in 18, 20 days on fire, so we'd worked the bugs out of the crew. We took a day off. Being close to Crater Lake, we just said, okay, let's cruise on up there. A lot of the guys had never been there. Holy cow, what a better place to spend the 4th of July. Camaraderie was just amazing. Everybody was happy, cheerful, looking forward to a great fire season. The following morning on the 5th, we got the word, okay, we're going to Colorado. So 5 hotshot crews flew down to Grand Junction.
There were lots of little things that didn't make sense even from the time from when we first got to Colorado. And some of them are pretty typical. When we got to the airport, there weren't any buses. And then they weren't sure which fire we were going to go to, and then they had issues with feeding, and there was just some little confusion. It was kind of obvious that things were a little unsettled here.
Yeah, we're going, okay, situation normal, Next morning we got up and the bus had our name on it and it said Glenwood Springs, South Canyon. So we drove to Glenwood Springs on the bus, went to the local BLM office. We'd flown, so we didn't have the usual complement of Pulaskis and shovels. The lady in the office didn't have a clue as to what to do to help us. She's going, oh, well, I didn't know you guys were coming. No, you can't have those tools. That belongs to the Colorado River Fire crew.
They weren't expecting us, didn't quite know what to do with us, didn't have any tools. We had to scrounge around, break into the river guys' lockers to get some fire tools.
No, we didn't break into cache. As far as I know, I mean, there's some things that happen that the crew does that maybe you're not aware of as the superintendent.
They told us to head into town, get some lunch, and halfway there we got turned around because they needed us on the fire. So there was a little confusion in the system.
So we got up to the Canyon Creek Estates. You could see the fire just laying there. Not real active, pretty calm, pretty innocent. My usual MO is to get a recon, talk to as many folks as I can about what's going on, and look for myself. When I'd put the squads together and put the manifest together, I hadn't taken into account some heavyweights that we had on the crew. The Helitack saw that and they swapped me out for Tammy Bickett. I balked and I wait a minute, what about my recon flight? And oh, we'll get it in, don't worry. So first 5 get flown over. John Kelso and Tammy Bickett, my squad bosses, they met right away with Blanco and made plans before I got there. Helicopter comes back, we get loaded up, the IC is over there going, hurry up, hurry up. So we zipped over there and I didn't get a recon flight, which I think was crucial in the outcome. Blanco took me aside and kind of laid out what the plan was, asked if my guys could go down with Mackie. It was too soon for me to even interject anything, you know, into that plan because I hadn't got a feel for anything yet. These jumpers have been here. They've scouted the lay of the land. They know what's going on. It's so without my going down there, I trusted the IC and the well, Don Mackey, basically, that things are okay down there.
The Prineville crew shuttle is interrupted to do bucket work. Blanco takes Shepard up to the H1 safety zone to show him the fire. No lookouts are posted and the terrain blocks views. Shepard searches for a better vantage while waiting for the second half of his crew to fly up. The first half of Prineville integrates with the West Flank jumpers.
Pretty excited because one of my rookie bros was on the Prineville Hot Shots, and I was wondering if I'd see him.
You know, I knew Kelso pretty well, John Kelso, and he come walking in, and everybody, you know, gave him the high fives and said howdy to him.
So we chatted, and then we said, well, we'll get together at dinner time, and we talked, and they kind of fell into line.
Routinely checked in with John down there on the radio. How's it going, John? Oh, great, you know, we're doing fine.
Scouting the line, Longenecker is discovering the true scale of the area.
Try to find an open area, you know, where it was, you know, it was a little bit open where he could see anything, and it was like, we shouldn't have to go any further. Isn't this it? We've gone far enough. Oh, we got to go way over here.
Back in Canyon Creek Estates, Brian Scholes and the second half of the Prineville Hotshots are observing the fire while waiting for the helicopter to finish bucket drops.
So I'm looking up at something that doesn't make sense. You know, these folks are up here, you know, conducting an operation. They're cutting line, they're throwing buckets around, running saws, and way down below them there's just smoke coming up. Well, that doesn't make sense. But they're doing it. They're doing it.
On the West Flank line, we had a major spur ridge coming off H1 that was blocking our view down canyon. Our line construction gets us out of the brush and to that spur ridge.
And when you got on the lunch spot ridge, the vegetation changed with the aspect of that finger ridge. Looking uphill to the left was all Gamble's oak. To the right was starting to become more open pinyon pine with light grasses on the ground and a lot of mineral soil.
And that's where, much to our surprise, the fire wasn't generally following a contour anymore as it had been on the other side. And we got to this ridge and all of a sudden there's smoke coming from way far down and we can't even see where it's coming from.
And I was ahead of everybody else, so I kind of, you know, looked the area over, and so I figured it'd be a good place to take a break because if the fire did take off, we wouldn't have to go anywhere.
The Missoula jumpers, they're kind of above me here, and the Prineville started filtering in below, and I was kind of sitting with Dale Longenecker eating for a while, and then he went off the scout.
Longenecker dropped off one side to go scout for line because the fire edge on that side of the incident was not very well defined. It was patchy. There was, you know, a clump of trees on fire here, a clump of trees over there that's not. It wasn't a clean edge as opposed to everything we had come down so far.
As forecasted, The cold front is advancing into the Storm King Mountain area. Earlier in the day, a meteorologist for the National Weather Service in Grand Junction was alarmed by the 40-mile-an-hour wind gusts associated with the front as it passed outlying weather stations. Recognizing that this meant trouble for firefighters, he called all the dispatchers in the area, telling them to pass the updated warning to their staffed fires. The only district that failed to broadcast that warning was the Grand Junction district. After completing bucket work, the helicopter is refueled and flies the second half of the Prineville Hotshots to the fire.
It was interesting when I stepped out of the helicopter, the first thing that that I noticed was when the helicopter flew away, I was expecting that wind to quit, no more rotor wash. And man, the wind is still howling even after the helicopter left. Kind of hold your hard hat on your head kind of a wind. And that probably should have got my attention a little bit, but I'm ready to go to work.
They were happy to be there, happy to be productive and finally get rolling.
I get out on the last load and meet the IC and Tom Shepard, my crew boss, and we get lined out with an assignment to brush out this ridge top, which makes sense to me. It's a good place to hold. It's a good place to be, and a necessary thing if we're going to have a safe place to operate.
We assembled our gear and we received a briefing from Brian Scholes that our mission was to brush out from H2 to H1.
Tied in with Brian Scholes, and we talked about what our group was doing and how we're going to kind of roll them into our operation.
Jumpers call from below, they'd run out of water, and that gave me an excuse to go down that fire line and see what we had.
So they went to work and I continued at my lookout spot. But I'm uneasy. If I knew what it was that was bugging me, then I'd had a good reason to pull the plug.
Generally, when you build a line right on the fire's edge, you're bringing your safety zone with you. There's no unburned fuel between you and the fire. What this fire had done was it had backed down through all of this brush on this hillside, and the canopy of the brush was still intact. In effect, everyone on the fire had unburned fuel between the fire and where they were.
Brian Scholes hikes down the west flank fire line with 2 5-gallon cubies of water. He meets Roger Roth at the stump.
I ran into a smoke jumper who was wrestling with a burning log. I was trying to go down the hill on him. And so I set down the water, and then we wrestled with the log a while and got it set in a bed so it wouldn't roll down. And we chatted for a while, and that point I intended to go on. I needed to see what was down the fire line. I needed to see what my folks were up to. I needed to see what was at the bottom of the hill. And the jumper said that he'd take the water. And about that time, I heard from my folks up on the ridge top that the wind had really picked up. And that ridge top is a really important place. We really needed to hold that line up there, and I thought it pretty likely in the wind that we would get a spot fire over the ridge. So I had to decide, am I going to go down the line to a problem that I don't know about, or am I going to go back up the hill and deal with a problem that I'm pretty sure is going to happen? And I went back up the hill.
Myself and Don Mackey and Kevin Erickson, we had a little snack, and that was our lunch spot.
You're kind of sheltered down in those little draws, and you didn't get a heck of a lot of wind on you. You could tell that there was some winds starting to pick up a little bit afternoon, and it just didn't register on us about being something big coming in. And at this time, nobody had said anything about that I had heard about here comes some big cold front.
But there's all those leaves, and they're swirling around, and the wind was picking up, and smoke was picking up a little bit, and I was a little uncomfortable sitting, and I don't know if it's just the nature that, when you're doing something, you're not thinking that much about it, but feeling a little bit uncomfortable there, and then wanting to just sort of get back up and get to work, so get a visual on things.
Don headed back up toward where you guys were working, and he asked Sarah and I to go back the other way and make sure that line was good. The water had been bumped to where Roger Roth was working on the tree, and I I offered to take that back to the crew at that time, and he goes, "No, I've got fresh legs. I haven't, I just got here." And anyway, so we kind of argued about that, and he ended up winning, and he left, and so Sarah and I just kind of took our time walking back up out of there.
This is a spot on the line I came down to just off the lunch spot ridge. There were embers and litter rolling out of this tree right here. Started putting in a cup trench, just doing busy work until a decision came to figure out what our next plan of action was going to be with getting around the fire. Mackie came by, chatted with him a little bit, and Tammy Bickett came by. She told me that the plan was that her crew was going to come in here and hold and maintain this part of the line. And so she said I could either go back to the lunch spot or just bump around the last person in her crew until I hit the first jumper that was along there. And I was going to head back to the lunch spot, but then I looked back up the line, and all her people are already coming down. It's pretty steep and narrow here. And so I just said, okay, I'll just head down there. I only thought it was going to be another 100 feet, and it ended up being a lot further than I wanted to go back into that oak brush. Dale Longenecker is scouting across a double draws looking for the fire's edge. He had overheard some radio traffic that a busload of smoke jumpers was driving to the fire from Grand Junction. When they arrive, he thought, they could work in from the bottom and tie in with our line.
That's kind of why I was here, was checking out to see what we had to do to keep it from backing down the hill there.
He called us and said, we've got another hot spot area down here. We got to an area where we could see Longenecker across the gully. Communicated my apprehension with Dale, talking with the jumpers that were with me. Do we want to get more spread out? We're having trouble holding what we have. We're leaving this area here to go down further. I don't know if we should be doing this. As we were having this conversation over the radio, kind of him-hawing back and forth, the fire activity above Dale on his aspect of the mountain definitely increased. There were some pine trees in that area, and it was definitely getting up into the crowns with the flame and the heat coming off of it and then rolling back up the hill.
And so it's like at that point, oh man, this is just getting bigger. So I called for a bucket drop, and I got one, but I think the winds must have been starting to pick up on the top, and they called for a bucket drop up there.
It was just some of the key leadership folks that had radios. I think there was a lot of conversation happening on the inter-crew nets. So a lot of the activity that was happening on the west side, I had no knowledge of. And we got a spot across the ridge line. I was working with Mackie and Sharon, the helicopter, so I asked him if he could free it up for a couple of bucket drops.
Winds very strong coming over the ridge out of the west. The last few minutes of us cutting brush and swamping, the swampers were able to lift the brush and the wind would take it off the hill.
We toss it up in the air and it disappears right into that east drainage. And we're doing that over and over, and it's kind of fun. We're kind of having fun with it.
So we received the order to move up to this spot where we tied in with Brian. And the spot fire that the helicopter was working was right over here behind us. At this time, we were really aware of the wind, but I wasn't real concerned about it. It didn't, there was still very little smoke coming off the fire. I would categorize it as drift smoke at the time. I wasn't seeing any torching, any flame, just heavy winds and a little bit of smoke coming off the fire.
And we're about ready to go in there, and the helicopter, comes in to let a bucket go, and it kind of disappears into the wind, and at that time things are starting to happen.
I don't think anybody on that fire was unaware of the potential that could happen. I think what would fool people, especially what took us by surprise, is how quick the change came. It was almost like a switch was flipped.
The cold front winds travel up the Colorado River drainage. As the canyon narrows, the winds are compressed and accelerated and flow up the west drainage.
We could see further down at the bottom of the canyon a spot fire taken off. The wind had just turned on that fire, you know, within a matter of seconds. Whatever was down there, you know, sparked off across the canyon, and you could definitely see it. Wind was on it, it was pushing it, it was going to get big. There was no doubt about it. You know, we all said, you know, hey, we're out of here. I called Mackie on the radio as we're making our way back to the lunch spot. It's like, hey, this thing is spotted across the canyon, and you know, he wanted to double check. It's like, you know, what canyon? And I came back and said, yeah, it's spotted across the main canyon. And I turned around and looked at it one more time, and it had progressed, I don't know, probably 50 yards in a matter of, you know, 10, 15 seconds. Definitely the wind was on it, so I replied back to him, yeah, it's spotted across the main canyon, and it's rolling.
Heading up towards that ridge, that's when we met Sonny Archuleta coming down to join us. And I could hear the radio traffic, and I could hear Don say, you know, we need to get out of here. And we started going back up, not too much of a sense of urgency, but somewhat. But then we turned around and looked and just started seeing this thing. The smoke was boiling up, and could hear Don saying, we got to get out of here now.
Kelso called and said, there's a spot down below us. I immediately said, John, get out of there. Come back on up here to the top. Okay, affirmative. I called Shoals and I said, get the crew up to H1. Get them to the safety zone at H1.
And he said to head to H1 to the safety zone, and we all lined out, grabbed the BLM folks here with us, and we started marching up the ridge.
I wasn't aware why we were doing that. I knew the wind was blowing, but I didn't know what exactly was happening. I did notice the column that was down in the west drainage. Just knew that I had to load up and go as ordered.
Kept hiking along, and the first jumper I ran into was Jim Thrash, and he was right by Terry Hagan, and they were just finishing up their lunch. And that's when Roger Roth walked up, long-arming 2 5-gallon cubies, and at the same time we noticed our attention was brought to this column that was down the drainage. And the way the topography rolls around here, in fact, you can't even see the lunch spot ridge from here, and we couldn't see the base of the column, but we could sure see the column rising and hear it. For us to head back to the lunch spot, it would have been walking directly towards the column. You know, it's just natural to want to go out the way you came in. We didn't know what was past that lunch spot ridge at all. So we walked directly away from the danger, and the rest of the Prineville followed behind us.
I was at the tail end of our little jumper squad, making our way back to the lunch spot. Ran into Mackie, and you know, he's directing us, you know, go up the ridge, there's good black up there. In later discussions with some of the jumpers in my group was, you know, in my mind I was going to be going up the ridge into the black, but in a couple of those other guys, their mind was to go back down the fire line that we had just built. So Mackie was there to make sure everybody was going up the ridge to the good black. You know, it was, you know, that was a good deal. He didn't have to stay there and make sure, you know, we knew the right place to go, and he didn't have to do that. And who knows, you know, me being at the tail end, I had my idea, but what happens if some guys start bailing off down the line? What, you know, I've thought about that since then. You know, if guys are bailing down towards the fire line, my idea was to go up the ridge. Would I have followed them down the fire line? I could have. I don't know. I'm glad I wasn't faced with that decision.
Mackie had called me on the radio and asked me if I was okay. I think that's when he started going down, you know, to make sure that all of the Prineville got out.
Boogied up the line and ran into the Sawyer and the Swamper at the tree. we stopped and said, hey, did you guys hear we're supposed to get out of here? And by this time things were really boiling up. And they hadn't heard it because he was running the saw and Swamper was throwing brush. And so we stood there for a few moments, and at this point, I'm ready to get out of here. And myself and Sonny started to continue up the line, and the Swamper was with us. Sonny was ahead of me, and I just remember more and more a sense of urgency of getting out of there, and I felt like pushing Sonny.
Brad Haw and I sit there and we're talking back and forth and talking about the oak brush. He says, oh yeah, this stuff's really volatile. You know, up till then I just saw the brush. Green brush that wasn't burning.
As we started getting further along the line and we're able to glimpse over the 12-foot tall brush and get some glances down into the canyon, we could see that the fire was now marching its way up towards us. And every little glimpse I got is just, I couldn't believe how much further the fire had advanced. It's just hard to comprehend that it was moving that fast. It's like moving through gasoline. It was just a wall of smoke and flame. And I realized later that we were looking at the side of the column. It's just a massive column, but to me, it just looked like a wall coming at us. And that's when we really, as soon as we saw that, that's when we were moving. We're moving as fast as we could. And the line was freshly dug, roots everywhere, stobs cut off from the brush. They're just like pungy sticks. You know, everybody took their turns, stumbling and falling, holding the rest of the line up, and you just kind of get that accordion thing going on. We pass the stump, and our group stacks up as we climb while crossing the spur ridge. Roth in front, Thrash second, I was third, Terry Hagan was fourth with the rest of the Prineville hotshots behind us. And it's through here, I took a glimpse back and noticed that Don Mackey had caught up with the group. We just locked gazes, and he was breathing really hard, had this grimace of concern, and it's a look I'll never forget. Driven by the wind and slope, the fire now has enough energy to ignite the oak brush and races through the unburned and underburned canopy towards the main ridge.
We start moving up the ridge, and it's an organized movement. We're all together. There's a sense of urgency, but we're not running for our lives, so to speak. We get up to there where the rocks are, and it's quite obvious to the folks in the front of the group that we're not going to make it to that safety zone. The fire is there. It has beat us there.
Get up to these rocks. Kim gets what I'm assuming is a radio call. I remember stepping up on a rock, and all of a sudden Kim turned around and was facing me and passing me heading down the hill. I turn around and look down the hill and see everybody, the back of everybody's hard hats retreating off the ridge, both our crew and the IA crew that was with us. At this time, I still have my earplugs in. I'm not exactly sure what's going on other than seeing the look on folks' faces. But at that point, that's when fire starts coming up over the top of this ridge, and I figure out very quickly what's happening.
There's flames beginning to curl over that ridge, and there's still people running out of there.
I remember running back down the ridge line, and the heat was so intense that, you know, I have my hand on my side of the face just to keep the heat off.
And at that point, it was chaos. It was loud, it was hot, folks were stumbling back down, the group was breaking up.
We're ordered to pull shelters, so we do as we come down that ridge, pull shelters, we're running with them in our hand.
At one point I looked back and I saw Alex, and it looked like he was a surfer coming out of a wave. You know, he was coming down the ridge with this big curl over him.
This is the draw at the bottom of the final 400 feet before the top. And it was right here where Thrash stepped off to this side, and we're just breathing really hard, almost out of breath, and he only had enough for just to go, shelter, like that. And When he said that, Roth stepped off to the other side to hear what he said. And for me, that was like, two slow cars pulling off on the road. They weren't quite going as fast as I wanted to go. I didn't know either Thrash or Roth, and that probably saved me, because if it had been a couple NCSB jumpers, I might have stopped. And the investigators told me, with the rates of spread they figured out, that if I'd been 5 seconds slower, that I might not have made it out. So if I'd stopped to say, hey, I don't think I'm not going to shelter up. I'm gonna keep going. And I didn't even have the breath to say that. So I just kept going.
And then a spot come across underneath you. And that's when I got on the radio and said, hey guys, you got a spot below you, better get the hell out of there. And then that spot went to the size of a house just immediately. There was enough air on it to really blow it up.
We got to the top of the ridge, myself and Sonny, and that's when we looked over again and saw what was going on. And that's when he asked me for my camera. I asked if I had a camera, and I said, yeah. So I pulled out my camera, gave it to him, and he took a couple shots and gave me back the camera. I took a couple shots with him, his back of his head, his helmet in it, in the foreground, and the flames in the back. And then I took that camera and I stuck it down my shirt because I didn't want to mess around with my PG bag. And I said, I'm getting out of here. It was sort of the fight or flight, and I was into the flight, and I headed out of there.
I made it this far, and I could hear Kevin Erickson and Brad Haw yelling at us from the tree up there. I stopped for just a second to look back, and I was looking right into Roger Roth's eyes. He was about 50 feet behind me, with everybody coming up behind him. And 50 feet is starting to make it's a lot of time as it's getting steeper and steeper here.
About that time, Brad Haw goes, hey, I think I'm going to get out of here. I kept yelling, and then I thought, okay, hey, the entire hillside was just it was fire. It was everywhere. And I could see the crew right below me. So anyway, I take off walking as hard as I can up through there, and then just take off running, because you could hear it. The thing was taking off like a jet.
I just immediately started blasting up the hill. I don't remember seeing anybody after that. My world was closing in to just what was exactly around me. It gets so steep, you're almost reaching out and using your hands to get up the slope.
People were spread everywhere. They were spread all along this ridge, different color hard hats all over the place. I never had the thought of getting my shelter out. Took me long enough just to drop my saw. My chainsaw had a name, and it was my tool, and I cared for it a lot. And I never thought about putting it down. But eventually I saw a stack of Domars and a stack of chainsaws, and I dropped mine there.
I run across our personal gear bags and shuttle them over into this depression, thinking, okay, if they're in a little bit of a hole, maybe they'll be okay. Tyler and Browning, the Helitack guys, came over and helped me do that.
Shepard leaves H2 and joins the fleeing Main Ridge group as they are forced into the east drainage by the heat and embers from the advancing flame front.
I look back, and here is Tyler and Browning back up towards H2, right above the lip of the east draw. And Blanco and I are both waving them this way. Come on, come on. And they saw us, and they turned around and went up the ridge, disappeared into the oak.
Headed up to the top, and I remember hitting the top, getting burnt pretty good. And as I crested over the top, Brad Haw's right in front of me, and he runs right into a tree, just wide open, full on, and hits his head, and it bounces him back, and he gets back up, and we slide down through a rock slide.
Along this final 100 feet to the top, the heat was getting unbearable. I don't remember carrying my Pulaski, I don't remember dropping it, but they found my Pulaski head about 86 feet from the top, and that's when it must have been getting so hot that I started shielding my my face and my ears. It was just dark red. Little cinder whirls were zipping by me, little gusts. The only thing I'd ever thought I'd use my shelter for as a shield, and as the old style shelter. So I kept hiking along, and was getting the shelter out, and I ended up bumbling it and dropping it. And the heat was so bad, and I don't remember exactly, it's kind of a little fuzzy, but it's like I tripped or was jumping to get away from the heat. And it felt all the world to me as I was doing that, like a wave hit me. It's like being at the beach and not paying attention, you know, standing with your back to the ocean, and a wave comes and just knocks you down. And so I ended up on the ground. I was screaming like a little girl, exhaling, and the investigator told me they thought that if that air that knocked me down had been superheated, that's what saved my lungs from getting fried. I immediately got back up, and my hard hat was off, and it got knocked off. My pack could either the straps either melted off, or the straps had slipped off, and I was waddling up, and I just punched my pack loose, and then I just ran over the top of the ridge.
The fire was coming over the ridge, over the top of us, as we made it off the lee side to protect ourselves from that, but we didn't really know where to go. Then that's when Louis yelled at me to take your earplugs out, and that's the first time that I got my earplugs out from running my saw. Things became a little bit more apparent. The sound of the fire, the sound of our Dolmars and the chainsaws blowing up as the fire came over the ridge on them, that all became very real.
After I bailed off here and was down there just a little ways, I could hear my crew foreman, Brian Scholes, and he's yelling what I think is my name. I think he's yelling, "Kip!" So I stopped, like, did I just really hear that? And he yells it again, and I said, yeah, I definitely heard it. So I moved back up the slope a little ways, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't really want to go up there, but man, did Scholes fall and break his leg? I mean, why is he hollering my name?
I ran into one of my folks that had stopped moving.
I squiggle up through a couple of trees, and I can look up the slope just a little ways, and I can see Brian Scholes, and he's actually yelling Kim. He's yelling Kim's name. It just sounded like Kip, and he's doing his best job to continue to motivate her to move down.
So I had to get a little feisty with her and tap her on the hard hat a couple times to get her going.
As I'm standing down there looking back up at Brian and Kim, I saw Eric Hipke come out. He'd come out that west flank line, and he was just barreling down the slope there. His skin was burned off his hands and hanging down, and he literally was still smoking. I just couldn't really fathom everything that I was seeing right then at that second.
And I was just taking these 10-foot bounding strides, tripping, falling, rolling, getting back up again, rolling down. It felt great not fighting gravity anymore and just making a lot of distance and no heat. I made it 200 feet down when I ran into Kevin Erickson and Brad Haw.
You know, we're kind of gathering our wits, and we're just right over the crest of the top of the hill. And we're like, holy cow, these guys didn't make it. And it was probably, maybe a minute later, we see you coming down. And you don't look very good. That's an understatement. And, you know, the heat and the orange and the stuff is coming over the top of us.
We're looking up at these 100-foot flame lakes just blasting over the ridge top, waiting for somebody else to come over for just a bit. And we're talking amongst ourselves going, where's the rest? And we're just saying things like maybe they sheltered or took an indirect way. And there's spot fires that are starting all around us. And so we moved down another couple hundred feet.
And I remember I did not want to go down into that next drainage at all. I did not want to go down in there.
Thank God Brad Haw was with us, because he had hiked up that gully of the east drainage twice, and so he knew it was a safe way out. But for us looking at it, we just seen how fast the fire had raced up that, you know, the west drainage, and here we are in the east drainage, the wind blowing up that also. The columns leaning over it, there's cinders dropping all over, and I just thought, we're just walking into a death trap, and can we even get out that way? And Brad Haw reassured us that is the only way out.
Circled around below the ridge here and ran into some of the BLM folks, ran into Tom Shepard. And I was pretty adamant at that point that it was time to go. And it was a difficult decision to go down into a place that was very likely going to burn up in a few minutes. But there was really no other alternative.
My folks were pretty scattered out, and Lauren Paulson was with me, and I could see a couple of our folks down in front of us. So, and then when I got the call from Butch to go ahead and head down the east drainage, then we started, yelling that out.
Somehow, through all that, trying to figure out how to get down the steep ground and the dissected ridges down into the bottom, I became separated from everybody. And I remember crew members yelling at each other across the canyon.
And figure out where folks are, figure out everybody going the right direction. Who's in the bottom? Do they have a radio? Make contact. Okay, we're good down there. Somebody's with a local. But for a few minutes there, it's disturbing when your folks are out there and you don't know where they're all at.
I basically stayed with the group of guys that I scrambled up across the east drainage and got up on that little bench with. As I came down through there, one of them was still scrambling up that little scree slope right there, and two of them were already up there, so I followed suit because it was kind of an eerie feeling down in there in that steep little canyon. You just can't see anything, so I scurried up there as well. And once we were up there, we were able to look down canyon just a little bit and put together that it was safe to proceed. Tom Shepard and what I believe was the incident commander, Blanco, came right down through the bottom.
I looked up and my thought was, oh geez, good, that's smart thinking. They're getting up, they can see around this corner, down canyon, and they can act as lookouts and let us know if anything's coming up at us. Like it would do us any good anyway.
I do remember Tom Shepard hollering, looking up at us and hollering, saying, come on down this way and right out this drainage.
They moved on down along with the rest of the crew, and I stumbled along in the rear, just numb with grief, just overcome with a terrible sadness, because I just felt in my heart that I had lost that part of my crew. Those 9 people that were down on the west fire line.
On the lunch spot ridge, Longenecker hikes back to the lunch spot while the others are hiking up towards H1.
Head back towards the lunch spot because that to me that was the safest spot to be. There was pinyon or juniper trees that had burned out, and then there was basically nothing below them. So I just kind of hung out in that area.
Running up the ridge, there was PJ, rocks, brush, so it wasn't just a clear shot, it was definitely picking your way.
The eerie orange atmosphere and the roar of the fire, it's really almost a surrealistic experience to be that close to a large fire and be underneath the smoke column like that.
Definitely the wind was pushing ash, pushing dust, pushing embers around.
By then, we're all panicking, and I have to admit, by then I was really freaking myself. I'm running uphill as fast as I can. I held on to all my equipment. I think that's just a subconscious thing you do.
You know what? I don't need this saw anymore. It's slowing me down. I give it a toss. And it's, I do remember still, as I toss that saw off my shoulder, it's like, oh, I just tossed my saw.
And, people were trying to stay together, loosely, but you get down to a point in your mind where you realize, your life is in danger, and, you start to react about saving your life. It's not like you don't care about other people, but it gets to a decision point where instinct takes over, and you want to live,
Keith Woods and Sonny Soto started, you know, cramping up. You know, come on, we got to go, we got to go, we got to go.
And we got up to where we pretty much ran out of steam. We were totally exhausted, out of breath, and nowhere else to go. And it just happened to be the most bare, clean spot on the Finger Ridge.
They're starting to gather up there, and Keith and Sonny are starting to fall behind, and it's like, come on, guys, we you know, we just a little bit further. And
Feliciano didn't even take 2 seconds. He instantly started scraping a spot for a shelter. I'm looking around at the density of the fuel, and I looked at the Missoula jumpers, and I said, hey guys, I think we need to get in our fire shelters.
As I came upon the group of jumpers, they had already started to deploy their fire shelters.
And from about 8 inches down, 6 inches down, every leaf, the dust, the soot, anything loose was actually getting sucked into the fire like a giant vacuum cleaner. It made it more difficult to get into your shelter. You didn't just flop it open like a nice loose blanket and shake it a couple times like a training video and crawl into the thing. It's streaming out from you like a flag whipping in the wind, and as you're trying to open this thing, it's just flapping crazy, you know, just, you know, wildly in the wind, and like I said, one loose grip and you would have lost it. So some people were actually fumbling with their shelters and starting to mentally shut down between the noise, the confusion, and the panic. And you know, the psychological fact that you realize you're going to crawl into this thing as a last resort. It's almost like crawling into your coffin to see if it fits, you know, before you get your burial. It's pretty strange psychological feeling when you realize you're committing, you know, your last hope to this piece of tinfoil.
No major flaming fronts or anything impacting us, but there were a few you know, ember showers blowing under the shelter, and you know, you could definitely hear it coming.
The thing that caused me the most alarm while I was in my shelter was trying to breathe. It got so smoky, even inside the shelter, that I was choking on my own snot. I could not stop from the mucus just pouring out of my face, and I was constantly spitting, and my eyes were so watery I could barely see, and I kept my corners of my shelter tight, but it was getting to the point where I was afraid I was going to pass out from lack of oxygen and then lose my grip on my shelter and have my shelter get blown away.
I called Mackey, you know, telling him, hey, we're deploying shelters, and I don't remember any reply. I don't remember any reply.
And all the way down, I was calling John Kelso.
No response. I kept calling, I got no response.
But it was a weird feeling seeing these folks coming in off the side drainages, both sides, and you know, they were in shock. And maybe I looked just like they did, but they were, you know, zombie walking and big eyes, and that was a really scary, you know. I knew that somebody didn't make it. I didn't know who, but I knew some folks didn't make it.
We headed on down the East Canyon, all the time thinking, wow, we're going to get met with a huge wall of flame coming up at any point, at any turn down this draw.
And once you get into the bottom of it, there's many places where there's absolutely no way to get out of it because it is so steep and cliffy, and so you're really committed once you get into the bottom of that drainage, and that was a very uneasy feeling. You got wind in your face, you got spot fires on your side, and you have no way of getting out of it until it ends.
There was people's gear scattered along through there. People were dropping their packs and just keeping their shelter.
I'm stumbling, I'm starting to get shockier with the wounds drying, and they're helping me over logs. And
there are rock faces that are essentially probably little waterfalls when water's going over them. I encountered a number of those on my way down. Every time that I walked up to one of those, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get through it, to get over it. Especially when you hit that bottom one and you walk up and it just drops off, and looking around to try to figure out how you're going to get down there without hurting yourself. All of them were, luckily they're traversable, you can get around them, but you have to pick your way, and it's not easy. It wasn't just walking down a drainage, it was scrambling and rock climbing in many cases.
You come around a bend and suddenly you can see the freeway and you can hear the cars, and you pop out into the sunlight, out from under the column, and you know you're going to make it, and it was a great feeling.
Took a picture of Derek at one of those little dry waterfall rock deals, because at that point we really could see the highway, and we're like, all right, we made it, and I took a picture because we were pretty thankful.
We finally made it to the highway, and it's the off-ramp right there to actually the South Canyon off-ramp. You know, cars zipping by at 70 miles an hour.
Well, Sarah was the first one other than our group that I saw that I recognized. And I mean, the hug she gave me was, you know, almost broke me in half. And that was a relief. But, you know, there was also that between us that folks probably didn't make it.
And Kevin was walking around, and I realized that he had gotten burned on the back of his neck. And yeah, he was kind of pacing around, and it was like, maybe you should get looked at too.
Jump in the ambulance with you and rode back in.
Limited information where everybody was at. I was assuming that the folks on the west side had, you know, hiked out on the west drainage.
There was a radio transmission from up at the Canyon Creek Estates, and somebody was saying, hey, I see some fire shelters across the way on the hill. And I got my hopes up, going, maybe they made it.
30 minutes after the final person makes it to the freeway, the fire burns out the east drainage. Tom Shepard, Brian Scholes, Sarah Doring, and Sonny Archuleta get rides back to Canyon Creek Estates, where they meet up with 30 smoke jumpers recently bussed in from Grand Junction.
So there's a lot of people there, and yeah, they're making calls, they're asking us when was the last time we saw them, and you know, the fire was just ripping at that point, and then eventually the smoke kind of cleared.
And sure enough, you could see a cluster of fire shelters over there, and it turned out to be the smoke jumpers that were down on the west fire line. So my heart sank once again.
I do recall the retardant plane coming over, and the fire had been dying down, and we were pretty much staying inside our shelters because the smoke was so bad. The actual threat from flame was past.
The wind was really blowing. I'm sure it was terribly rough flying. The second drop, it was almost eye level, you know, or below us, but the wind blew that retardant right into us. Making numerous radio calls, trying to get a head count, who's where, who's on the fire, you know, and where are they?
Like I said, there's definitely a denial in my mind about, you know, where everybody was, and, you know, even though once Tony did his head count and we knew who was with him, and once they came back and there was still some missing folks, it was like, well, this can't be happening. They got to be somewhere, you know. We'll hear from them soon.
Stuff was burned out and starting to cool down, and not as much smoke, so I figured I'd go up to see how those guys were doing.
As the smoke cleared, we got out of our shelters, we checked everybody.
And we were trying to come up with a plan, you know, knowing that we had missing firefighters out there.
I could look across the entire gutted out basin of brush that had burned up during the blow up, and I could see what looked like a high impact cargo chute billowing in the wind.
We just started, you know, all of us hiking over to that area, and you know, that's when it turned out to be you know, fatalities.
And that was, of course, an extremely grim moment for everybody there.
We came upon the lower group of firefighters, and you know, I was the guy that was talking on the radio, so I think I was communicating with the helicopter pilot. He was out searching through the air, and you know, I told him it's like we found some of the firefighters, and you know, he came back and asked, you know, do we need medical? And then it's like, what do you say? You know, I didn't know what to say, so I just said, yeah, no, it's too late for that.
Tony replied back, it's too late. And yeah, we lost it. Shoals took off down the road. I was just heartbroken, just sick. Tom Fitzpatrick, a jumper from Redmond that I knew, happened to be standing next to me, and we shared an embrace. We hugged, and then I just started wandering around.
Walking up the hill and finding the second group.
You know, I walked up on Jim Thrash, was the first one I walked up on, and I recognized him right away. And you know, when you're in that state of mind with everything that you just went through, you're not thinking real clearly. And first thing thought that came to my mind was, oh my God, how am I going to tell Holly? You know, I didn't think about, well, some Forest Service officials will go to her home or whatever. For some reason, I was thinking, like, here, I found him. I'm going to have to be the one to tell her. And I was thinking, like, what am I going to say? What am I going to do?
Walking further up the hill, finding, I do believe it was his Scott Blecka. You know, that was hard. That was hard to see that guy. He was close, very close.
They were going to go up there and do search and rescue, and asked if I wanted to go because I had been up there, knew the area, and at that time I'm just like, not me, can't do it. But I believe Sonny got in the helicopter, went up there again, and I just couldn't. I was like, I've seen enough. I'm not going up there.
And we're standing up there at the top of the hill. There's not so much as a twig left that hasn't been consumed. And here's this like 4-foot snake that somehow lived through the fire, probably went underground and had came back out. Sort of a weird twist to the very end of the fire to see this, you know, snake, you know, sign of evil, slithering through the burnt brush. And that was, after that, it was a helicopter ride off the hill and going through everything else that people go through.
It was not until 2 days later before they found the bodies of Rich Tyler and Rob Browning in a gully at the head of the West Drainage. Their view from H2 would have been of the fire racing up towards H1, sweeping its way towards them, with the prevailing wind driving it into the East Drainage. While the rest of us were forced down the uninviting East Drainage, Tyler and Browning had a bit more time to move along the ridge away from the advancing fire before heading towards bare ground with flight helmets in hand, presumably hoping for helicopter pickup. With the brush obscuring their view, what they couldn't see was a 50-foot deep gully in their path, where they got trapped as the full force of the fire hit them.
As far as healing and recovery, it's an interminable task, it seems like, to get back to where you want to be in your mind. And it's taken me forever, this long, to even talk about it. It took 15 years for me before I went back and I walked up that hill. I walked that west fire line. I didn't know how I was going to react to that. needless to say, it was an emotional time for me. But I'm glad I did that because that helped. Today's firefighter has, I think, a much greater safety awareness. If they see something they don't understand or see something that they think is out of whack, they're encouraged today to speak up, ask about it. And you know, it takes 20 people to run a hotshot crew. Not just one, it takes 20. And every voice is important. And there just could be something that someone misses along the way that the newest recruit notices and brings to the supervisor's attention and ends up saving some lives. So that's where I'm at today. Everybody's got a voice. Yeah.
Well, I know how it's ending.